I'm going to give you a very practical example of what ecosystem-based adaptation looks like in our work at Conservation South Africa, and just starting with some general introductions and then taking you into an example of one of our approaches, and particularly as it applies to opportunities for business to engage. So you may or may not be aware, but 80% of South Africa is classified as what they call rangeland, which means that the majority of our country is primarily suited to grazers, either wildlife or livestock. Our rangelands in South Africa are unique and home to many special and rare species and ecosystems, but they're also home to increasing levels of degradation and millions of people living in poverty that depend on those rangelands for their livelihoods. Within this space, there's also an increasingly high level of wildlife crime, and essentially what you're left with is a situation in which neither people nor nature are benefiting from the current trends. Conservation South Africa supports economic development that values nature because we fundamentally believe that people need nature to thrive. So our work is not about conservation or people individually, it's about bringing them together, and therefore everything that we do is underpinned by ecosystem-based adaptation and different approaches in that regard. So just briefly, we're part of Conservation International, so we are an independent NGO, but we link into the global program and really follow their mission in building on a strong foundation of science, partnership, and field demonstration to empower people to responsibly and sustainably care for nature, our global biodiversity, for the well-being of people. So in South Africa, we've got 3 demonstration landscapes where we currently work, and we've chosen landscapes that represent different elements across the climate spectrum, from the semi-desert succulent Karoo of the Northern Cape through to the Afro-montane grasslands of the Eastern Cape and up into the savanna of Mpumalanga and Limpopo. Over the years, what we've done is worked to map out ecosystem-based adaptation priorities within our targeted landscapes, which are defined either by districts. So in the Northern Cape, we work in the Namakwa district, in the Eastern Cape in the Alfred and Zoe district, or by other boundaries like in the Kruger to Canyons, where we use the Biosphere Reserve as our broad boundary. And what we've done is overlaid social, economic, and ecological priorities in these districts to try and understand where are the priority areas for intervention that will deliver the greatest benefit for both people and nature. Over the last 19 years, we've looked at many different ways to bring people and nature together, but ultimately we've settled on a focus at the moment on livestock. So you can see in the top block there, just from the recent National Biodiversity Assessment, in terms of pressures driving terrestrial ecosystem habitat loss, overutilization of rangelands is the second greatest driver of habitat loss in our terrestrial ecosystems. And that's largely due to unmanaged or poorly managed livestock. So we've developed an EBA approach that I'll be giving you an example of today that really unpacks this in terms of what is the climate impact of a changing climate on water scarcity and heat stress, which reduces the availability of grazing materials for livestock. And then we've developed an ecosystem-based adaptation activity, which is really to implement rotational grazing and restore degraded rangelands. And then looking at a range of human well-being outcomes that are linked to improved livestock well-being that secures pastorist livelihoods. We've also mapped out, and I won't go into too much detail now, but a whole range of benefits for people and nature from restored and revived rangeland. That's everything from improved plant cover to increased carbon sequestration to the delivery of a wide range of goods and services that allow people to cope better during droughts and floods. We also have a huge focus on skills development and technology so that we're really building a sustainable economic approach to address what is essentially an ecosystem failure as a result of degradation and a market failure as a result of inappropriate market practices. So what we did, and this is now a separate entity from Conservation South Africa, but was actually try and address this problem using market mechanisms. So we established a social enterprise called Meat Naturally that's now working outside of South Africa, so it's Meat Naturally Africa at the moment. And this is a social enterprise owned by farmers and operated by conservationists. So it's a partnership between Conservation South Africa under Conservation International and the Peace Parks Foundation, and really looking to see how we can use the market to drive ecosystem restoration for the benefit of people and nature. So how does it work? We take livestock farmers and we focus here on communal farmers, so those farmers who have the least access to land because they're using a shared resource. And we negotiate conservation agreements with them to implement better grazing practices on their rangelands. Farmers then implement conservation actions, and NGOs provide support actions around other degradation responses, whether it's erosion control or wetland restoration. And then we also support and monitor compliance with the farmers and provide market access as an incentive for farmers to implement more responsible grazing practices. So this is an example of one of the auctions. And here really what we're looking at is a market failure where communities in South Africa on communal land own up to 50% of the livestock in the country, largely unmanaged and contributing less than 5% of the total market share on the meat markets. A lot of these farmers, due to apartheid and other structural inequality, have been excluded from formal markets. They live in remote areas and it's very difficult for them to access markets. So by introducing the concept of mobile auctions, and we also have mobile abattoirs, what we've effectively done is brought the market to the farmers in exchange for responsible rangeland management practices. This is a typical market day before COVID. Unfortunately, I don't have a photo for you today, but we've seen some really interesting social distancing measures implemented during COVID. But it's just an important point that livestock in South Africa are often seen as both an economic asset, but also a long-term savings mechanism. And during the last month, we've had 5 auctions alone in the Eastern Cape because there's a sudden need for cash as people struggle with job insecurity. And our system is designed to be responsive. But there are conditions for farmers to participate in these auctions, and those are all around ensuring sustainable rangeland management to secure the ecosystems that these cattle depend on. We've also developed a range of innovations. This is a mobile abattoir that's designed for use in foot and mouth disease zones. This particular abattoir has been a little bit problematic, but we've invested in a range of different technologies to try and find ways to overcome market barriers. So in this case, foot and mouth disease is a market barrier that disallows farmers from selling into traditional value chains, supply chains. And so by being able to have an abattoir on site, to removing a de-skinned, dehorned carcass that can then be safely moved to market, which otherwise wouldn't be possible. To date, we've had over 54 million rands worth of livestock sales, and this is money going directly into the pockets of community farmers, and therefore directly addressing the issue of poverty and ecosystem degradation in South Africa's high biodiversity rangelands. This is from the Eastern Cape, showing the beautiful grasslands in the background. Over the last couple of years, there's been a dramatic increase in the number of farmers benefiting, and we had just under 1,400 communal farmers benefiting from Meat Naturally last year. Meat Naturally is also now looking at other revenue streams, including wool and fodder, where there are needs for incentives other than just market access. This project has then developed a set of really interesting lessons learned and science and a range of approaches that have been bundled together for the Green Climate Fund. So coming back to the sort of purpose of this discussion is how does this link to both business and Green Climate Fund projects, and has informed the design of a project for Botswana called Ecosystem and Livelihoods Resilience. climate change risk reduction through ecosystem-based adaptation in Botswana's communal grazing lands. So taking directly from the lessons learned in our 3 different habitats in South Africa, we've designed a program for 490 million rand in collaboration with the government of Botswana, the Gaborone Declaration of Sustainability in Africa, and this is now sitting with the Green Climate Fund for approval, and will result in the creation of 6,000 new jobs and the restoration of 4.6 million hectares in Botswana's communal grazing areas. Just in closing, a quick overview of the sort of technicalities of the approach as it's been applied. And this is essentially a system in which we're trying to address ecosystem degradation and market exclusion, improving animal condition and also improving ecosystems and reducing disease outbreaks. As we all know, zoonotic diseases are an increasing threat both to economies and livelihoods. So that was just a quick overview of a rather complex project, but I think it will give you some practical understanding of what the theory of ecosystem-based adaptation looks like on the ground when we're working to support ecosystems, to support people, and to really develop sustainable and flourishing green economies. Thank you very much.